My human husband seemed so weak until pirates breached our hull. Lyra had watched her husband patch up a child's knee for the past 4 minutes, and she could not decide if she found it endearing or deeply confusing. The child was a small Draenei girl, no older than 5 cycles, who had tripped over her own feet near the passenger lounge doorway. She was crying loudly, more from fright than pain, because the cut was barely worth mentioning. Lyra had seen Velhari warriors walk off injuries 10 times worse without breaking stride. But Ethan Cole had dropped immediately to one knee, pulled a small first aid kit from his jacket pocket. He always carried one, for reasons Lyra had stopped questioning, and was now speaking in a low, calm voice while he cleaned the tiny wound with gentle hands. "There you go," he said softly. "All done. You were really brave, you know that." The girl sniffled. Then she smiled. Then she ran back to her mother without another sound. Ethan stood up, tucked the kit back into his pocket, and rolled his shoulders. He looked around the lounge with calm eyes, found Lyra watching him, and gave her a small grin. "What?" he said. "Nothing," Lyra said. He crossed the lounge and dropped into the seat beside her, stretching his legs out and picking up the paperback novel he had left face down on the armrest. He found his page immediately and went back to reading as if the last 5 minutes had not happened. Lyra looked at him for a moment longer before turning her gaze back to the viewport. The Starwood Grace was a mid-sized civilian transport, old but well-maintained, carrying about 60 passengers across a 2-day route between the outer trading post on Henry Station and the edge of Velhari home space. The ship had no weapons. It had no military crew. It had Captain Osser, a weathered Draenei male with gray skin and careful eyes, and a crew of 9 who handled the ship with quiet efficiency. It was the kind of vessel that relied on being unremarkable to stay safe. Lyra had chosen it because it was direct and inexpensive. She had not thought much about safety. She was Velhari. She was the safety. That thought brought her gaze back to Ethan again. He was human. Fully, softly, entirely human. He stood at average human height, which meant the top of his head came to just below Lyra's chin. He had short brown hair, a calm face, and brown eyes that always seemed to be thinking about something pleasant. He was lean but not in the way that suggested strength. He was lean in the way that suggested someone who forgot to eat when he was deep in a book. They had been married for 2 years. Lyra's family had not been unkind about it, but they had been honest. Her mother had pulled her aside before the ceremony and asked, quietly, whether Lyra had thought this through. Velhari valued strength. They valued composure under pain, a warrior's bearing, the ability to look at a hard situation without flinching. Her mother had said, gently, that she was not sure the human had those things. Lyra had told her mother she was wrong. She still believed that. She just was not always sure she could explain why. Ethan was not weak in any way that she could point to clearly. He did not complain. He did not make excuses. When things were difficult, he simply kept going, quietly, without drama. But he also cried at sad films. He fussed over small injuries, both hers and other people's. He laughed easily and often. He cooked elaborate meals and seemed genuinely pleased when people enjoyed them. He once spent an entire afternoon helping an elderly neighbor repair a garden wall back on Earth, not because the neighbor had asked, but because he had noticed it was crumbling. These were not the qualities her people sang songs about. And yet, there were small moments she had filed away without fully understanding them. The way he stood in a crowded room, always with his back to a wall, always facing the door, so naturally that it seemed unconscious. The way his eyes moved when they boarded a new ship or entered a new building, scanning without appearing to scan. The way he had once caught a glass that had slipped off a table before Lyra had even registered that it was falling, his hand moving with a speed that was completely at odds with the relaxed posture he had been sitting in. She had mentioned the glass thing once. He had shrugged and said he had quick reflexes. She had not pushed. She watched him now, reading his novel, completely at ease, one ankle crossed over the other, entirely unbothered by the fact that they were about to pass through a stretch of space that the captain had, in a brief and carefully worded announcement earlier, described as occasionally active with unregistered traffic. Lyra knew what that meant. It meant pirates. She had already catalogued the lounge. 6 other passengers here currently. 2 Draenei males near the far window, traveling together, both older. A young Sylvie female traveling alone, reading something on a small screen. An older human woman named Clara, white-haired and sharp-eyed, who had spoken warmly to Ethan over dinner the previous night. 2 more passengers she had not spoken to yet, a pair of Brescian traders who seemed primarily interested in their own conversation. No one here who could fight. Ethan turned a page. You are doing the room thing again, he said, without looking up. I am not, Lyra said. You checked the door 3 times in the last 2 minutes. She looked at him. You were reading. I can do both, he said mildly. He turned another page. We will be fine. The Grace has been running this route for 6 years. Osser knows what he is doing. That is not what concerns me. I know. He glanced up at her then, and his expression was warm and completely calm. I am right here, Lyra. She did not say what she was thinking, which was that his being right there was the problem. If something happened on this ship, she would be trying to fight and trying to protect him at the same time, and she was not sure she could do both. She had never told him this. It did not seem kind. The ship hummed steadily around them. Somewhere deeper in the vessel, she could hear the faint sounds of the kitchen being cleaned up after the evening meal. A child laughed somewhere down the corridor, probably the same Drenai girl Ethan had patched up. The lights in the lounge were low and warm. Clara looked up from her tea and smiled across the room at Ethan. He smiled back. Lyra exhaled slowly and made herself stop scanning the door. He was right. They would probably be fine. This was a routine trip. She was a trained Velhari warrior with 15 years of combat experience, and she was sitting in a civilian lounge worrying about a stretch of space that most ships pass through without incident. She leaned back in her seat. Ethan reached over without looking up from his book and rested his hand on hers. His hand was warm. She turned her palm up and let her fingers close around his. Better, he asked. Somewhat, she said. He smiled at his book. Outside the viewport, the stars were very still, and the darkness between them was wide and quiet, and the starward Grace moved through it without a sound. Lyra watched the dark and told herself there was nothing out there. She almost believed it.my human husband seemed so weak until pirates breached our hull. The alarm did not build slowly. It hit all at once, a sharp, piercing wail that cut through the quiet of the lounge like something physical, and before the sound had even finished its first cycle, Lyra was on her feet. The lights went red. Not the warm dim red of a low-power evening setting. This was emergency red, the flat, ugly red that meant something had gone wrong and the ship knew it. The lounge filled with the sound of passengers reacting, a sharp gasp from the Sylvie female, a scrape of chairs, the clatter of Clara's teacup hitting the table. The ship lurched. It was not a violent movement. It was worse than that. It was a slow, grinding deceleration, the kind that came from an outside force locking on and pulling, not from any choice the ship itself had made. Lyra felt it in her feet first, the way the floor seemed to drag backward for half a second, like the ground was being pulled out from under the ship, and she grabbed the back of a seat to steady herself. Towfield, she said, more to herself than anyone. Yes, said Ethan. She looked at him. He had set his book down on the seat beside him. He was standing now, not because he had scrambled up in alarm, but because he had simply risen to his feet, and his eyes were moving across the room in slow, deliberate sweeps. The warm ease that had lived in his face all evening was gone. Not replaced by fear. Replaced by something else entirely, something very quiet and very still, like a surface that has stopped moving not because nothing is happening beneath it, but because it is holding itself that way deliberately. Lyra had never seen that expression on him before. Captain Osser's voice came over the shipwide channel a moment later, strained but controlled. All passengers, this is the captain. We have been brought out of transit by an external tow field. The source is an unregistered vessel off our port side. At this time we are requesting identification from the other ship and following all standard contact protocols. Please remain calm and move to the central hold on deck 2. Crew will guide you. Please do not attempt to access the cargo areas or the bridge. The channel closed. The Drenai traders near the window were already moving toward the door. The Sylvie female was on her feet, her screen clutched to her chest. Clara had not moved yet. She sat very still with her hands flat on the table, and she was looking at Ethan. Ethan, Clara said quietly. What do you think? I think we should move, he said. Come on. He crossed to Clara, helped her to her feet with a hand under her elbow, and guided her toward the corridor. Lyra moved to the doorway first, checking the hall both ways out of instinct. Clear. She waved them through and fell in behind. The corridor was filling up. Other passengers were coming from the sleeping cabins, some pulling on outer garments, some carrying small bags, most just looking frightened. A crew member, a young Draenei female in a gray uniform, was moving through the crowd with her arms slightly out, directing people toward the stairwell at the far end. "Central hold, please," she was saying. "Deck 2, central hold, this way." Lyra kept Ethan and Clara in her sight line as they moved. The ship had gone very quiet under the alarm. The constant background hum of the transit engines was gone, replaced by a lower, duller vibration that felt wrong in Lyra's chest. The tow field was still active. They were not moving under their own power. They reached the central hold and filed in with the others. It was a wide, open space used for cargo overflow when the ship was at capacity, mostly empty now, with bare floor and ribbed metal walls and overhead lights that had switched to the red emergency setting. About 40 passengers gathered in clusters, talking low or not talking at all. Lyra put Clara near the inner wall, away from the large doors. She looked around the room, counting, clocking faces. She could see one crew member near the hold doors and another near the far stairwell. Neither of them was armed. Velhari ships always had at least 2 armed crew on inter-system routes. This was not a Velhari ship. She was aware of how much that mattered right now. A new voice came over the ship channel. Not Osir this time. It was deep and rough, and it carried the guttural edge of Keth pronunciation, a species that Lyra knew well enough to respect as fighters, which made what she was hearing worse. "Attention, passengers and crew of the Starwood Grace. My name is Gorak. You have been stopped by the Red Fang. You have 10 minutes to collect your valuables and move them to the main cargo doors for collection. If this is done quietly and without trouble, most of you will continue your journey without further incident. If anyone makes this difficult, we will cut through your hull ourselves and take what we want anyway. The 10 minutes start now." The channel closed. The hold was silent for 3 full seconds. Then the noise started, frightened voices, a Draenei child beginning to cry, the Brescian traders arguing with each other in rapid, hushed words, someone further back asking a crew member what to do. Lyra was not listening to any of it. She was looking at the hold doors and thinking about the structural layout of the ship, the location of the cargo bay relative to their current position, how many crew the Red Fang likely carried on an operation like this, and what the inside of a Keth pirate's fighting style looked like. Lyra. She turned. Ethan was standing just behind her left shoulder. He had taken off his jacket. He was folding it with careful hands, the creases straight, the collar neat, and he set it down on a nearby crate with the kind of deliberate attention that made no sense in this moment. She looked at his hands. They were steady. Not the steadiness of someone forcing themselves to stay calm. The real kind, the kind that came from somewhere deeper. "Ethan," she said quietly. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready," he said. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Looked at him again. That expression was still there. The still one. The one she had never seen before tonight. "Ready for what?" she asked. He looked up from the folded jacket. His brown eyes were very calm, and very clear, and there was something behind them that Lyra could not name yet but recognized on an old, deep level, the way you recognize a predator not from what it is doing, but from the way it is waiting. "Stay close to the inner bulkhead," he said. "And when things start, stay behind me until I tell you it is safe." "Behind you," she repeated. "Yes." She stared at him. He looked back at the hold doors. Outside, distantly, metal groaned against metal, the sound of a docking clamp sealing against the hull. The 10 minutes, it turned out, were not going to be needed. My human husband seemed so weak until pirates breached our hull. The hull scream came first. It was not an explosion. It was something almost worse, a long, tearing shriek of metal being cut from the outside, deep in the belly of the ship, somewhere near the cargo bay. The sound carried through the walls and the floor and into the chest of every person standing in the hold. Several passengers cried out. The Draenei child who had been crying stopped, as if even the crying had been frightened away. Lyra counted seconds under her breath. 12 seconds after the cutting sound stopped, the hold doors burst open. They came in hard and fast, the way people enter a space when they are used to controlling it. 8 of them, all armed, in mismatched armor that had the practical ugliness of gear that had been repaired and reused and repaired again. They wore the Red Fang mark on their chest plates, a slashed red line over a dark background. 2 were Keth, thick-limbed and heavy, with the natural plating on their shoulders that made them hard to hurt without hitting the right angles. 2 were Draenei, which surprised Lyra. Draenei mercenaries were rare but not unheard of. The rest were a mix of smaller species she placed as hired labor rather than serious fighters. One of the Keth at the front shouted for everyone to get down and stay down. Most passengers dropped immediately. Clara grabbed the wall and lowered herself slowly, her knees clearly giving her trouble. Lyra stayed standing for exactly 1 second longer than everyone else, enough to count weapons, count spacing, count the gap between the two Keth at the front and the group behind them. Then she knelt, because staying visible as a Velhari was not useful yet. She could hear Ethan breathing beside her. Slow and even. The pirates moved through the hold with loud efficiency, pulling people to their feet, taking bags and communication devices, speaking in rough, impatient tones. A short Draenei pirate with a scarred face moved down the row where Lyra and Ethan were kneeling, yanking bags from passengers as he went. Then he reached Clara. Clara had nothing worth taking, a small personal bag with a reader inside and some traveling clothes. She held it out without being asked, because she was sensible enough not to fight over nothing. But the Draenei pirate took the bag with more force than he needed, and when Clara did not let go fast enough, he shoved her, hard, with an open hand against her shoulder. Clara hit the wall with a sharp cry. Ethan moved. Lyra's mind registered the movement before her eyes fully did. One moment he was beside her. The next he was not. She turned her head and saw him already across the 2 meters between them and the pirate, and his hand had closed around the pirate's forearm, and then the pirate was on the floor. It happened so fast and so quietly that for a half second, the nearest other pirate did not even react. Then he did. He raised his weapon and stepped forward, and Ethan did not retreat or raise his hands. He stepped into the weapon's reach, inside it, past the point where it was useful, and what happened next was brief and controlled and completely final. The pirate went down. The weapon skittered across the floor. 3 seconds. 2 pirates. Neither of them moving. Lyra was already on her feet. The remaining pirates registered what had happened at different speeds. The 2 Keth at the front moved first, because they were the best trained and their instincts were good. Lyra went to meet the closer one, because she was Velhari and she had 15 years of knowing exactly where to strike to make a Keth's natural armor work against them. She hit hard and precisely, and the Keth went down heavily on his second step. The fight stopped being quiet after that. Lyra moved and Ethan moved and the hold became something entirely different from what the pirates had planned for. The hired labor, the smaller, less trained ones, made the mistake of hesitating, trying to figure out what was happening before committing to action. That hesitation cost all of them. Lyra took 2 more. Ethan took 1. He fought with no wasted motion. That was the thing Lyra kept noticing even in the middle of her own movement. There was nothing extra in what Ethan did. No aggression, no anger, no performance. He closed distance, found angles, controlled outcomes, and moved on. When one of the Draenei pirates pulled a short blade, Ethan adjusted without breaking pace, redirected the knife arm, and ended the encounter in a way that left the pirate breathing but unable to continue. He checked that, too. She saw him glance down to confirm the pirate was breathing. In the middle of a fight. He checked. The second Keth was the last one standing from the initial group. He had more sense than the others. He had not charged in, he had backed up and was covering the door with his weapon raised, trying to decide whether to fight or run. Ethan stopped. He was standing in the open center of the hold, relaxed, arms loose at his sides, and he looked at the Keth the same way he had looked at everything tonight, calm, clear, and completely without fear. "Put it down," Ethan said. His voice was quiet. Not raised. The same voice he used when he was talking to a frightened child. The Keth did not put it down. Ethan moved again, and it was over in 4 seconds. The hold was quiet. 8 pirates on the floor, most of them conscious, none of them in any shape to cause more trouble. Passengers pressed against the walls. The Draenei child was making small sounds in her mother's arms. Someone near the back was breathing very fast and audibly. Lyra stood in the middle of the hold and looked at her husband. He was checking his hands. A cut across 2 knuckles on his right hand, not deep. He pressed it against his forearm for a moment, then let it go. He looked around the hold with the same slow sweep he had used back in the lounge, making sure he had not missed anything. Then he looked at Clara. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. His voice had shifted, the quietness was still there but the edge had dropped out of it. He sounded like himself again. Clara was staring at him with very wide eyes. She shook her head slowly. "Good," he said. He crossed to her and looked at her shoulder, gentle and careful. Can you move it? She moved it. He nodded. Lyra was still watching him. She could not stop. She had trained for half her life. She had fought in 3 formal conflicts and a number of situations that were not formally recorded. She knew how to read a fighter, the way they carried their body, the way their weight shifted, the tells that showed up before the action did. She had been reading people that way for 15 years and she had never, not once, seen any of those signs in Ethan. Not in 2 years. Not a single time. He had hidden it so completely that she had not even known there was anything to find. She thought about the first aid kit in his pocket. She thought about the way he always sat with his back to a wall. She thought about the glass he had caught without looking. She thought about every moment she had spent quietly worrying about protecting him. A crew member appeared in the hold doorway, pale-faced and shaking, holding a comm unit. He stared at the floor and then at Ethan. "The second sweep team," Ethan said to him, before the crew member could speak. "How many and where?" The crew member blinked. 4 more. They were heading for the bridge. Ethan looked at Lyra. She rolled her shoulders, cracked her neck, and moved toward the door. "Together," she said. For the first time since the alarms had gone off, he smiled. "Together," he agreed. My human husband seemed so weak until pirates breached our hull. They moved through the ship fast and without speaking, because they did not need to. That was the part Lyra registered first, how naturally they fell into it. She took the left side of every corridor and he took the right, and when she slowed at a corner, he held position without being told, and when she waved him forward, he moved without hesitation. They had never trained together. They had never drilled together. And yet the way they moved through the dim red corridors of the Starwood Grace felt like something practiced. The second sweep team had split up. 2 of them were at the bridge entrance, trying to get the door open. The other 2 had gone toward the engine room, likely looking for the ship's control systems. Ethan pointed without speaking. She nodded. Engine room first, lose the engines and they were all stranded, and Gorak would have every advantage. The 2 pirates at the engine room were young. Lyra could see it in the way they were standing, not a combat posture, just 2 people trying to look like they belonged there while they worked on a locked panel. She and Ethan came around the corner together and the moment was over before either pirate had time to become dangerous. Ethan zip-tied their wrists with a length of cable he had taken off one of the pirates in the hold. He had also, somewhere in the last few minutes, acquired a short-handled blade, which was now in his left hand, held loosely. He had not asked for it. He had just found it. They backtracked to the bridge. These 2 were better. Both Keth, both wearing more armor than the others, and they were not surprised. They heard footsteps and turned with weapons raised. Lyra went low and Ethan went wide, and what followed was fast and close and loud, blades and armor and the hard sound of impacts on the corridor walls. One of the Keth caught Lyra across the ribs with a forearm that would have cracked bone in a softer species. It hurt. She let it push her and used the momentum to get behind him, and then he was done. When she straightened up, Ethan was already securing the second one. His shirt was torn at the collar. He had a fresh cut along his left forearm and a bruise forming under his right eye. He looked at her ribs with a focused, assessing expression. "I am fine," she said. "I know," he said. "You moved well with it. Are you sure nothing is cracked?" She pressed 2 fingers against the spot. "Pain, but clean. Bruised. Not broken." He nodded once, accepted it, and moved on. Captain Osser opened the bridge door himself when they knocked. He had apparently been watching through the corridor camera and had seen enough. He was pale under his gray skin and his hands were shaking slightly, but he was upright and composed. "Most of the crew are locked in the dining room," he said. "Gorak is still aboard. He came over with the main team through the cargo bay breach. He is in the forward corridor near the docking tunnel." "Is he alone?" Ethan asked. "He has 3 crew with him. His personal guard." Lyra looked at Ethan. He looked back at her, and for a moment he was simply her husband again, weighing something, being careful in the way that she had always known he was careful, about everything, about all of it, but especially about her. "This one is different," he said quietly. "Gorak is not hired labor. Give me the corridor." She wanted to argue. The words were already forming. But she looked at his face, not the stillness from earlier, but something even quieter, something underneath the stillness, and she understood, in the way she understood things about him that she could not always explain, that this was not about protection. It was about clarity. He was asking for space to do what he knew how to do. I will cover the approach, she said. No one gets past me. That is all I need, he said. Gorak was exactly where Asur had said he would be. He was large even for a Keth, a full head taller than his crew, with natural shoulder plates that had grown thick over decades of use and impact. He wore a commander's brace across his chest and carried a weapon at his hip that looked like it had been modified well past its original design. His 3 personal guards fanned out when they saw Ethan and Lyra come around the far end of the corridor. Lyra stopped at the halfway point and held position. Ethan kept walking. Gorak looked at him the way a large creature looks at something smaller, not threatened, not concerned, just evaluating. One human, Gorak said. You took down my crew with one human. Your crew made poor decisions, Ethan said. He stopped about 3 meters out and stood easy, hands loose at his sides. Gorak's eyes moved to Lyra and then back to Ethan. Something shifted in his expression, not doubt yet, but the first hairline crack of it. You should have stayed with the other passengers, Gorak said. Ethan said nothing. I have taken 40 ships, Gorak continued. I have never had trouble from a human male on a civilian transport. I know, Ethan said. That is because most human males on civilian transports are exactly what they look like. Gorak stepped forward. His guards moved with him. And what are you? Ethan looked at him for a moment, quiet, clear, unhurried. I spent 6 years in a unit that does not have an official name, he said. We operated in places that are not on any public maps. The things we did are not in any record anyone can access. I got out because I wanted something quiet. A life. A home. He glanced back briefly at Lyra, just for a second, and then returned his eyes to Gorak. I have that now. I am very protective of it. Gorak moved fast for his size. So did his guards. Lyra had her hands full with 2 of them immediately, one Keth and one Draenei who moved together with the coordination of people who had fought alongside each other before. She gave ground, let them commit, and turned their momentum against them with the precise, ugly efficiency of Velhari close combat. The Keth went down first. The Draenei lasted longer but not by much. When she turned back, the 3rd guard was already on the floor. Gorak and Ethan were still standing. Gorak was bleeding from a gash across his jaw. One of his shoulder plates had been cracked. He was breathing hard, not because he was exhausted, but because he had just understood something, and the understanding was costing him. Ethan had a split lip and a cut above his brow that was running blood into his eye. He was wiping it away with the back of his hand and watching Gorak with that clean, patient stillness. Gorak swung again. A hard, wide blow, the kind that ended fights. Ethan was not there when it arrived. He was beside Gorak instead, and then behind him, and his arm was around Gorak's neck at the precise angle that cut blood flow without cutting air, and he held it with a grip that Gorak's size and natural armor could not break because it was not about strength, it was about position, and angle, and the knowledge of exactly where to put pressure to make mass irrelevant. Gorak went down slow, and when he was on the floor, he was breathing, and Ethan stepped back and looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then he turned to Lyra. Signal Asur, he said. Tell him to call the patrol. His voice was calm and unhurried. His hands, at his sides, were completely still. Lyra stared at him for a moment. Then she reached up and pressed the comm unit she had taken from a fallen pirate and called the bridge. When she finished, she lowered the device and looked at her husband in the flat red light of the corridor. He was pressing the torn edge of his sleeve against the cut above his brow. He caught her looking. I know, he said quietly. I should have told you. She did not answer that. Not yet. There would be time. There was a patrol cruiser that needed to arrive first, and a ship that needed to be secured, and 60 passengers who needed to know it was over. But there would be time. My human husband seemed so weak until pirates breached our hull. The Galactic Patrol cruiser arrived 52 minutes after Lyra sent the signal. By that time, Gorak and what remained of his crew had been secured in the cargo bay, zip-tied and catalogued and watched by 2 of Asur's braver crew members. The whole breach had been emergency sealed with the portable foam packs from the damage control locker. The passengers had been moved back to the main lounge, where they sat in the low light with cups of whatever the kitchen could produce quickly, talking in quiet voices or not talking at all. Ethan had gone to every passenger in the hold personally. Lyra watched him do it. He went from person to person, the Draenei child and her mother, the Sylvie female, the Brescian traders who were still shaken but trying to hide it, and he spoke with each of them for a minute or two, low and calm. Not explaining what had happened. Not drawing attention to himself. Just checking. Making sure each person was physically all right, and then making sure they felt like someone had noticed them. He spent the longest time with Clara. They sat together on a bench near the viewport, the old human woman and the man who had folded his jacket with careful hands before walking into a fight, and Lyra could not hear what they said from across the room, but she could see Clara's expression slowly settle from shaken to steady, and she could see Ethan smile at something Clara said, and she could see Clara laugh despite everything. That was the thing that kept catching her. He had hurt people tonight. He had hurt them efficiently and without hesitation, because it had been necessary, and he had not flinched from it. But the moment the necessity was over, he had stopped. Completely. As if a door had opened and then closed again, and behind it was exactly the same person as before, the men with the first aid kit, the men who cried at films, the men who helped neighbors repair walls. He was not two different people. That was what she was starting to understand. He was one person who had learned to carry two very different things in the same hands without letting them bleed into each other. When the patrol officers came aboard, Ethan gave a quiet, thorough debrief that lasted about 20 minutes. He used precise language that Lyra recognized as the vocabulary of someone with formal training, terms and structures that belonged to military reports, not civilian accounts. The patrol lieutenant who took his statement was young, and she kept looking at Ethan with an expression that shifted, several times, from professional to something that was harder to name. When the debrief was done, the lieutenant asked Ethan for his service record number. He gave it to her without hesitation. Her eyes widened slightly. Then she straightened up and thanked him with a formality that had not been there at the start of the conversation. Lyra filed that away. Gorek and his surviving crew were transferred to the patrol cruiser in restraints. Gorek said nothing as they led him out. But as he passed through the lounge, his eyes found Ethan across the room, and he stopped moving for just a moment, not from resistance, but from something else. From the look of someone who had found an answer to a question they had not known they were asking. Then the patrol officers moved him forward, and he was gone. The Starwood Grace limped the rest of the journey to Velhari space on reduced power, the hull breach sealed but unrepaired, the crew quieter than they had been before. Osser came to the lounge before the arrival to shake Ethan's hand, and held it for a long moment before letting go and walking away without saying anything beyond thank you. That night, after the ship had docked and the passengers had disembarked and statements had been given and all the things that needed doing had been done, Lyra and Ethan sat together in the small cabin they had booked for the journey. The emergency lighting was off. Normal light was back. It felt strange after hours of red, softer, warmer, almost unreal. Ethan had cleaned up. His cuts had been treated, properly, carefully, with the same first aid kit he always carried. He was in a clean shirt with a cup of tea in his hand, and he was sitting on the edge of the bed, and the paperback novel was on the table where he had left it what felt like a lifetime ago. Lyra sat in the chair across from him. For a while neither of them spoke. "You should have told me," she said finally. He looked at his tea. "Yes. 2 years, Ethan." "I know." He looked up then. His face was open in the way it always was, no defensiveness, no excuses being built behind his eyes. "When I left, I left. I did not want to carry it into the life I was building. I thought if I did not talk about it, if I did not bring it into our home, it would stay where I had put it." "And does it?" she asked. "Does it stay there?" He thought about that honestly. "Most of the time," he said. "The hard part is that I never know which times it will not." Lyra looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the question her mother had asked before the wedding. She thought about the word her people used for strength and what they meant by it, the visible kind, the kind you could see from the outside, the kind that announced itself. She thought about all the things she had quietly worried about when it came to Ethan, all the small fears she had folded away and tried not to show him. She thought about a man who had stood in a red-lit corridor and looked at a Keth pirate commander and spoken without raising his voice or shifting his weight. Strength that announced itself was one kind of thing. What she had seen tonight was something older, something quieter, something that did not need to announce itself because it had already done the accounting and knew exactly what it was. "My family thinks you are soft," she said. He smiled a little. "I know. I am not going to tell them." He looked at her. "Not because I want to keep secrets," she said. "Because they would not understand even if I tried to explain. And also because I think you would rather they kept thinking it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. I would." She nodded. That was the right answer. She had expected it, and it was still the right answer. She crossed the cabin and sat beside him on the edge of the bed, and he shifted to give her room, and she leaned against him the way she always leaned against him, because he was warm and solid and steady, and because even now, even after everything tonight had rearranged, he felt exactly the same to lean against as he always had. That was the last piece that settled into place. He had not become something different tonight. He had always been this. She had simply not had a reason to see it until tonight gave her one. Outside the viewport, the lights of the Velhari docking station moved slowly past. A patrol cruiser was visible in the middle distance, its running lights blinking in the dark. Somewhere aboard it, Gorak was being processed and logged and added to the long record of people who had made poor decisions in space. Ethan reached over and picked up his novel. Found his page. Started reading. Lyra watched the stars. She thought about strength. About what it looked like from the outside, and what it looked like from the inside, and how those two things were almost never the same. She thought about a man who cried at sad films and kept a first aid kit in his pocket and made elaborate meals and carried something quiet and absolute inside him that he had never needed to show her until tonight. She thought she had married well. She had always known it. Tonight she just knew it differently. The ship settled into the dock with a low, final clunk, and the stars outside went still, and Ethan turned a page, and Lyra closed her eyes, and the long night was over.